Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. I'm here at Roma Street Parklands, right in the heart of Brisbane. And you can't move for the amount of colour and horticultural treasures they've packed into this garden. And they're not the only ones. This week's episode is loaded with all the know-how and inspiration you need to get cracking in your garden. Take a look.
Our gardens are an opportunity. They're part of a wider context. And how they relate to the surrounding landscape depends on the plant and material choices that we make. I'll show you a garden where these decisions have been a priority, and the result is absolutely stunning.
I'm exploring the world of the Gesneriad family. Perfect indoor companion for collectors and newbies alike.
I'm learning how to grow some unusual, cool climate berries that you probably haven't heard of, Haskaps.
And we meet a teenager who's serious about her indoor growing.
It's just really refreshing being able to wake up every morning, turn the lights on, and you're surrounded in like a little jungle-like atmosphere.
I'm in Draper, a little rural hamlet about 30 minutes drive northwest of Brisbane. And it's here that two young urban farmers have spent the last 8 years growing fresh local produce and trying to close the loop on the problem of food waste in the hospitality industry. Good mates Alice Starr and Phil Garozzo are both working here full-time, and they've turned 2 acres on this scenic 40-acre property, which belongs to Alice's dad, into productive growing space with 86 beds of fresh produce, each 21 metres long.
Dad bought this property when I was in high school, and about 10 years ago, I started coming out to help because he had a little hobby garlic crop out here. All of a sudden, obviously, at the end of a garlic harvest, you've got all of this garlic. And I was like, Dad, what are we going to do with it all? So I spoke to a friend of mine who owned a cafe in West End, and I asked him if he wanted to buy any of the garlic that we were growing out here. And he said absolutely yes. And Phil was working in that cafe, and he was developing the composting system there. And so our friend sort of told us that we should potentially have a chat and work together. I invited Phil out for a garlic planting one day, and he basically hasn't left.
So you guys are partners in farming?
Partners in farming.
That's right.
Yes, post-romantic, now just agricultural partners in farming.
What have you got growing on the farm at the moment?
Lettuce, peas, kales, cabbages, rocket, beetroot, carrot. Try to grow as much variety as we can, depending on what season we're in.
Did you say garlic, Mizuno, or pak choi then?
No.
But the real story is the source of fuel they're harnessing to keep these beds churning out the produce. And the relationships they've set up within the hospitality industry to close the loop on industrial food waste. What is loop growing?
When I came out to the farm, we started composting on a bigger scale and decided to set up specific patches to grow back to that chef, hence creating a loop back to that kitchen.
They collect 2 to 3 tonnes of food waste each week from 16 commercial kitchens, then compost and reuse it at the farm to grow more food. And that food is then sold on to the same kitchens who provided the waste.
We actually try to not use the word waste. We call them yield. So we develop partnerships with hospitality businesses all throughout Brisbane, and we install composting systems into their cafes, and there's colour-coded bins there, so it makes it really, really simple for all of the chefs to get the bin that they need. So if it's really acidic, if it's onion or garlic or citrus, they'll get the orange bin, and they put all of those scraps into the orange bin. We've got one for eggshells, we've got some for milk, for bread ends and things like that, so everything's all separated on site at all of our partnered venues.
What was it that prompted you to get involved with Loop?
We've known Phil and Ali since we worked with them at a cafe when I first started Loop, and it's always just been really important to us to use them and just be a little bit more mindful and conscious of our footprint in our community.
Zoe Tulliners is co-owner of Alphabet Cafe in Brisbane's vibrant West End. She joined forces with Loop growers 5 years ago.
All the people who work here know Phil and Ali, they know the process, they know that we're a closed-loop cafe, so there's no waste here, everything is yield. And I think that that's really important to our customers as well.
Thanks so much. See you guys later.
Now, I gather the chicken bottle is a little bit of a hit.
Oh, the chicken milk? Yeah. You got a lot of people asking, how do you use chicken milk?
It started because when I was making coffee, every flat white you're pouring milk down the drain from that little bit left in the jug. So I just said, I'm not doing this, and I started capturing it in a little jar and then taking it back to curdle, mix with some bread and feed as a porridge to the chooks. And as we expanded the system, I just started getting the other cafes to try it out as well.
The bins are dropped off and collected weekly from the participating cafes and restaurants, and then taken back to the farm where the processing begins.
Because everything's separated out, we can actually dose it into our composting systems really effectively out here. The eggshells is a really important one for us. So obviously we deal with a lot of cafes, and so they go through so many eggs there. And we bring them back out to the farm and we lay them all out in the sun to dry them out. And the sun is great at getting rid of any pathogens that may be present in there. And then we chip them all down, and then the product that is left is essentially ag lime. So that's a resource that we don't have to buy for the farm.
Enormous piles of food waste become huge in-ground worm farms.
After we feed the worm farms, we'll let the chooks over the yields we put on there, and so they're eating it and they're letting their manure down on it. And once they've done that process, we'll cover it up and then move on to another stage the next week to mature.
So everyone's tapping in on the process.
Yeah, the goats love it too.
Yeah.
What other relationships have you got for bringing these waste resources onto the farm?
Well, one really important relationship that we have is with a mushroom farm just pretty close by to us. And they grow all of their beautiful oyster mushrooms on hardwood sawdust blocks. And so that's a really, really excellent carbon source. We bring so much high nitrogen yields into the farm with all of the yields from the cafes. We really need to balance it out with carbon. And so it's the perfect relationship that we can bring a resource that would normally be wasted from their business, and we can use that as a yield on the farm. We use that beautiful resource that we've turned into compost, and we feed the soil back out here, and that nourishes the land enough for us to grow really beautiful vegetables that can then go back out to the very same venues that we got the compost from in the first place. Their produce is amazing. There is just such a difference. You know the people who grew it, you've seen where it grows, you know the process, and the taste is just amazing. You can't beat it.
So does garlic remain one of your staples?
Yeah, it does. We grow it every year. So this is the original garlic that my dad started growing about 10 years ago now. And we've kept that seed alive the whole time. This is the perfect garlic for the subtropics. It's not true garlic, it's elephant or Russian garlic, and it's actually in the leek family. So it grows really well here, and it's been a really good crop for us that we grow every year.
But it hasn't all been smooth sailing. The 2022 Queensland-New South Wales floods devastated many, and the farm's proximity to the creek meant it was particularly hard hit.
It was pretty big, so it was a complete wipeout for us. We've had a lot of natural disasters come through here before, but that one was definitely the biggest that we've experienced.
It was a potentially it's all over moment when we saw it. Yeah, it was sobering and humbling, very humbling experience. Yeah.
what's underpinning everything and where you're heading.
Community underpins it all. We're in this to be a positive change in our world. It has a really good heart, this city, and it's got a lot of good community, and that's what's made this project possible.
What is catgrass? What does it do? Well, catgrass grows like that. It looks like grass, but it's a very good nutrient and filled with vitamins for your cat and dogs too. If you grow it in a pot, it'll grow to about 30 centimetres high and the cat can come and eat it. And it does eliminate the fur balls in their throats. So if you've got a cat or a dog, this is a great herb, a present for them.
Why can't I bring plants into Australia? Well, firstly, Australia has very strict biosecurity laws, and these laws exist to protect us from the inadvertent introduction of pests and diseases into Australia, and they could devastate agriculture and our precious biodiversity. Now, it's not just plants that you can't bring into Australia, it's parts of plants or seed. You see, it's impossible for an amateur gardener to detect the presence of these inadvertent interlopers into our country, and the consequences could be disastrous. And that's why Australia is respected around the world for its strict biosecurity rules, and you should respect the rules as well.
This amazing yellow flower is a type of achillea or yarrow called coronation gold. Now, I love it for its soft, ferny foliage, and then over the warmer weather, you get these upright spikes of beautiful, bright yellow flowers. Now, I'm not the only one that loves it. The beneficial insects like bees, ladybirds and hoverflies love it too. But you might know yarrows as being a traditional plant for the herb garden or a plant that you add to compost. The normal yarrows can be rather invasive, whereas this is a lovely clump-forming plant that's worth having to give you some summer and autumn colour.
I want to show you my tomato growing system. Now, I've shown you how to make these little paper pots before. They're fantastic for raising seedlings to quite mature plants in. And the benefit of them is that when you're ready to plant these into the garden, the whole thing can go straight into the ground. The paper just biodegrades. You can see that the roots are actually starting to come out the bottom. But in my garden, the climate here is quite cold, and so the soil is still too cool to put these in the ground. So I do the same thing by putting them into pots. And then when you plant a tomato, you can actually go quite a bit deeper than the existing soil level in the pot because they will form roots all the way up that stem. So you can just actually remove the lower leaves and then you drop the plant into the hole or into your pot. Next thing, you just backfill around the top there. Just go as full as I can. Gently firm down. And then that is ready to grow on in this pot for another 2 or 3 weeks. It'll get bigger, stronger. And the benefit of that is I can keep this sheltered right throughout the next couple of weeks. And then by the time the soil is warm enough for my tomatoes to go into the garden, I'll have lovely, lush and mature plants.
As our cities get denser, we need to be smarter about the spaces we have. And gardens offer so much. Habitat for critters, cooling spaces in the urban jungle, peace, tranquility and beauty. Josh is here with a unique and inspiring example right in the heart of Perth.
A 665 square metre block of land in a riverside suburb close to the city. Here in Perth, and in anyone's language really, this is prime real estate. Well, it would be for most people if it wasn't for a few other important defining attributes of this battle axe block. For example, there's an 8-metre fall from front to back, and there's also 2 natural springs that bubble up through it. Andrew and Erica Boyne aren't most people. Where 4 previous owners were unable to find a way to make a home design work on this challenging parcel of land, this determined couple have triumphed. Not by conquering the site, but by working with it to build a beautiful, low-impact family home that has enabled them to devote 80% of the land to garden, filled with native species. Andrew, what an achievement. As an architect, was designing and building your own home on this difficult block a puzzle that you had to solve?
Yes, it was, and the site, it was really an interesting one. It had a lot of water and it had a really kind of steep gradient. Great architecture or design comes from challenges, and this site is unusual in Perth because it's not flat and sandy. So it offered challenges, and we were able to develop sort of solutions to that.
Fresh water coming out of the ground on Perth's Swan Coastal Plain in a summer dry climate? A blessing or a curse?
Oh, an absolute blessing. It made the site difficult for other people to deal with, and that allowed us to sort of take advantage of it. But in terms of gardening, it's been fantastic because we can able to irrigate the whole thing all year without any sort of scheme water. So the site has an 8-metre fall on it, and so we needed to level out a few of the areas. So there are 3 terraces on the site, and we tried to balance the fill levels so that we weren't importing a lot of sand. So there's, 3 terraces through the property. And the other advantage with that is that it also allows different planting conditions. The edges of the terraces were raised to bring the more arid type species like verticordias and things, bring them out of the water table.
How about drainage?
Well, drainage is a real problem because the water level is so high. We have soak wells or drains around the property that help dry it out, but also the level changes of lifting up certain areas help to dry out those zones. And we sort of protect the house with a main drainage system.
And what do you do with all the storm water? For example, I see there's no gutters on the roof, so when the rain comes off that and hits the ground, where does it go?
Well, all the rain is collected through soak wells, and then we push it all through the main creek system that runs through the property.
I see you've reduced the amount of paving on the site. How does that help with stormwater management?
Well, in a battle axe property, you've got a large bit of area there that would be used as a driveway typically, but we didn't feel that was a useful use of that space. It caused drainage problems. So we keep the cars at the top of the block, and then we have a garden that moves down, and it provides a really nice entry feature.
How do the springs relate to the water feature?
Well, the springs are collected halfway up the property, and then they're collected in soak wells and then piped down to the water feature. And from there, they flow out over a little waterfall and then down through a creek, which runs through the property. And then eventually it runs into the wetland.
What inspired your plant choices?
Well, we wanted the house to really feel like it was part of Western Australia and sit in a West Australian garden. So we've tried to create 3 different gardens with specific species selections. So we have a Gascoyne Geraldton region, a South Coast Esperance region, and then another area for the Perth Swan Plain.
And why those particular regions?
Well, they're important little bioregions for Western Australia, so there's some really interesting plants that come from there. But it also gave us an opportunity to connect to holidays and travels that we've had around the state. But I think we've got at least 200 West Australian species.
Any favourites?
Well, definitely the Verticordia grandis, or the scarlet feather flower. That sits pride and place in the house and is visible from the main living space, and that sits up in its tube, so it's well drained. We've got a whole bunch of Banksias. They will grow and become sort of flowers for birds. And then the third one would be the carry tree, which I grew for my father. We told him it would be, he doesn't really like trees that much, and we told him it was a shrub. And then I heard him say, and I gave him the Latin name, and I heard him say, "What am I, carry tree? What am I going to do with this?" And it's 3 years old and is about 10 metres tall now, so it's obviously going really well in the bottom of the garden.
With all of this water and these lovely layered native plantings, have you seen much wildlife come into the garden?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of new birds come in. Fortunately, we've got lots of established trees around your neighbours' properties, so we see cockatoos and things. And then we've had a lot of frogs come into the site, so you can hear some now. There are 4 species of frogs that live in on the garden. So we're still pointing out the stuff.
So as an architect, do you feel you've achieved what you set out to do with the design?
I think so. Eric and I had lived in the United States for a while, and we always had trouble reconnecting back to Perth because we'd always thought we would go back. And this house and this garden was about really joining us or connecting us to place. It has a garden that we can see from the inside, like the blends in and out. And we really feel connected to the animals and birds and plants. And that was really what we were trying to achieve, and I think it's been really successful. And we really love living here.
We all know African violets, but what about all the rellos? There's some quirky members of the extended family out there, and Tammy's here to introduce us.
Whilst houseplant staples may bring to mind big leaf aroids and ficus, there are another group of plants that are more than worthy of a place in your home. There are beautiful, versatile and varied species in the Gesneriaceae family, with stunning foliage and flowers. For the avid collector of interesting plants, especially for those looking for something different indoors, these are well worth learning about. Today, I'm going to introduce you to some of the lesser-known relatives and show you how great they are at bringing colour and interest into your home. Gesneriads are a geographically wide-reaching group of plants with over 3,000 species in over 150 genera from temperate to tropical regions of Asia, Africa, Central and South America, and even a couple from Queensland. In the wild, they grow as epiphytes, or they're semi-epiphytic, which means they grow in pockets of bark or in leaf mould in trees. Some of the common attributes of these plants are they need high humidity and low intensity light level. You can tell a lot of these plants like to live in shady spots due to a purple coloration on the underside of the leaves, an adaptation to help absorb more light. Outdoors, they grow best in a sheltered, dappled light spot in tropical areas. Leaves will noticeably burn in too much direct sun. They have these beautiful tubular flowers. Even the open flowers of African violets are tiny tubes. And many, though not all, have these soft, furry leaves, and provides an insulating layer of warmth or cooling. There's the fine-rooted rosette forms of the African violets and lady slippers. Or some have a storage tuber, such as syzygias. This holds water, making them reasonably drought tolerant, and they can go dormant in extreme cold and pop back again when the weather is better. They both can have textured leaves and very bright blooms in general indoor conditions. Most others popular in nurseries are the trailers, and these are the perfect hanging basket specimen or to flow over tall pots and shelves. Nodding violets, most commonly Streptocarpus concord blue, are like the hanging version of African violets, equally soft to touch and surprisingly hard to kill. They produce purple flowers frequently and in abundance once established. They like similar conditions to African violets but can handle a bit more light. Others include Columnia and Aschenanthus, or lipstick plant, that prefer higher humidity. They have striking bright orange or red flowers against dark foliage, a colour and contrast hard to find in other indoor plants. There are quite a few cultivars, from the long, dark leaves of black pagoda to curly and variegated forms. Codonanthe has thick, cascading, dark green leaves, which are less showy than others, but can be much less fussy and is worth the wait for the profusion of gorgeous white flowers. The goldfish plant, or Nematanthus, has shiny leaves and bright orange flowers that look, well, sort of like a goldfish with a big belly. For indoor plants, it's best to make up your own well-draining media. I use 2 parts African violet mix, 2 parts perlite, and 1 part charcoal. Water in well. The somewhat succulent, thick leaves mean they can hold on to water and cope with the soil drying out between watering. But they can shrivel a bit when dry for too long and prefer a consistent, regular soak, just like they would have in a forest. Look for a fertiliser that's high in potassium, and this will help encourage flowering. Always use according to the manufacturer's instructions. Another great thing about these plants is that once you have one, you have many. They're super easy to propagate. It's a gift that keeps on giving. Simply snip off a 10 to 15 centimetre piece from the tip of the stem. This should include at least 3 nodes. Make the cut just below a node and remove the bottom leaves. Pop in small pot and keep moist, or pop in water till the roots form. You can also pop a sandwich bag or other plastic cover over the top to ramp up the humidity and speed of the root growth. This is also helpful if they get a bit leggy. Snip off long stems that don't have many leaves and cut into pieces that do have a leaf or 2 to regrow into new plants. This also keeps the original plant looking its best. They can be attacked by common indoor pests like mealybugs, but are less susceptible given decent conditions. If you do find any, don't be tempted to spray them, as this can damage the furry leaves on some species. Rather, dab horticultural oil directly onto the pests, or try to remove them by hand as soon as you see them. So if you're looking for a new family member to bring indoors, there is sure to be a Gesneriad to suit your taste and conditions. Grab a cutting from a friend or go on a nursery hunt to explore this unique addition to your home.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, Jerry's got some great ideas on how to stretch your dollar further in the garden. Jane shows us how to get on top of a weedy problem. And we meet a teenager who's cultivating a passion for indoor plants. Did you know that of the hundreds of thousands of edible plants on the planet, we generally only eat about 200 of them? There's so many new and exciting crops to try and grow in your garden. And Hannah's discovered a sweet surprise down in Tassie. I reckon it's going to be on the top of lots of people's wish lists.
I'm heading to the Huon Valley to check out a sweet little berry that loves Litteruta's cold winters. This farm is the first in Australia to grow Haskap berries, and I'm super excited to have a taste. Denise Wilcoxon and her husband Howard retired to this 8-acre property with the idea of growing some kind of cool climate crop. The process of bringing a whole new food plant into Australia is a pretty ambitious retirement plan. How did you choose Haskaps?
We were publishers, and we decided we wanted something different, a completely different world, and we loved Tasmania. And we really wanted something to keep ourselves occupied and fit and that sort of stuff, because if you sit around doing nothing in retirement, you can become history very quickly. So Haskap berries was it.
I guess it was just research on the web, and Howard found these and said, oh, these look interesting.
And so we looked up these cold weather berries, not realising initially that they weren't grown here. And then, of course, we discovered they weren't. So one thing led to the other, and here we are.
Haskaps are also called honeyberries, and they look a bit like someone's taken a blueberry and stretched it. Haskap bushes are deciduous woody shrubs that grow about 1.5 metres tall. They're native to the cold northern regions of North America Europe and Asia, and while most Australians haven't heard of Haskaps, they're hugely popular in Canada, Japan and Russia. You actually had to travel a fair way to go and taste your first Haskap. Where on earth did you go?
Canada. The University of Saskatchewan have been doing a lot of research on these berries. So we did the trip over there and met a lot of really interesting people, tasted a lot of berries, and thankfully we really liked them.
Now, you'd already established your grow space here before you travelled to Canada to taste your first Haskap berry. It sounds, pretty impressive, but also a little bit crazy to me.
Possibly it was.
I was just going to say, probably more to the crazy part.
And it paid off.
It paid off.
After a lengthy process to get Haskap seeds through quarantine, eventually Howard began the painstaking process of raising the plants, selecting the strongest ones, then planting out an entire orchard. Today, there's around 80 of the original plants Howard first raised from seed that are now around 4 years old. They taste sweet and tart, kind of like a cross between a currant, a blueberry and a grape. It tastes so good, I can't wait to find out how to grow them.
They like a really cold climate, somewhere between 800 and 1200 chill factor hours, which is under 7 degrees. They survive in minus 40 degrees, so in most places they're covered in snow in winter.
And I understand that they're not as fiddly as some other berry plants.
That's one of the good things about them. They're highly flexible as far as soil goes. They'll take anything from 5.5 pH to 7.5, which is a heck of a range. Our soil's around about 6.2. It's heavy clay, and they seem to be doing pretty well on that. It takes a lot to kill them. We haven't done that yet, but they certainly will take frost and that sort of stuff. And in the summertime, as long as they're reticulated, they'll take 35 degrees. You could say they're a pretty hardy plant.
Denise and Howard think the plants will probably live for up to 50 years. And once they're fully established, each bush can produce 3 to 4 kilos of fruit per season.
And I use them for all sorts of things. I make a barbecue sauce, which I use as a pizza base, but it's also can be used with sorbets, delicious with chocolate. And I make liqueurs. I'm still experimenting with lots of different recipes with it. So, it's a very versatile berry.
Because of the experimenting that Denise and Howard are doing here, Haskaps will gradually be available across the country.
Selling plants is our main aim. And so selling to home growers and commercial growers also.
If you want to see if your garden gets cold enough to grow Haskaps, there's a link to calculate winter chill hours on our website. And really, if you live somewhere that gets really super cold winters, it's only fair that you should get some sweet and juicy berries as your spring reward.
It's official, there's no denying. Gardening is the best hobby out there. But for anyone who's got a little bit carried away, gardening has the potential to get a bit expensive. Fortunately, Jerry's got some great tips to get your buck to go a bit further.
Times are definitely getting tougher, and probably for many people, there's less money available to spend out in the garden. But never fear, because I've got lots of dollar-stretching ideas which I've gathered over the years, and I can't wait to share them with you. Idea number 1, free plants. If you don't save seed, you really should start, because it's a life-changing experience. You know, you buy a packet of 10 or 12 seed, and if a few fail, you feel a failure. If you save seed, you can maybe get hundreds and thousands of seed. It builds your confidence. And if you lose a couple of hundred, it doesn't really matter. Now, all you need is containers to store them, so some old jars Or perhaps some takeaway containers like this, because they're otherwise instant landfill. I asked friends to save silica gel in containers from things like multivitamins tablets. And that way I can put those into each jar and they keep the seed dry during storage. I also keep pantyhose because this is weatherproof material. You can slip this over the ends of developing seeds of plants that have pods which explode when they're dry. This captures every single seed. And if it does get wet, well, it dries out really quickly. And best of all, it's reusable. Similarly, propagating plants by cuttings is a way of multiplying plants for nothing. Now, what I've got into the habit of doing is to time when I prune things to shape, say like this little plant here, a little coleria. When I prune it, it's also a good time to take cuttings. So caring for the plants and multiplying them becomes one thing. And I'm using recycled pots and recycled potting mix. So this is as cheap as it can be. Idea number 2, free fuel. The key to a productive garden is replenishing the nutrients as you harvest, and animal manures are a great way to feed the soil. But you can also think outside the bag. For example, if a circus comes to town, they could be only too delighted for you to take the manure off their hands, and that's what happened. I managed to get my hands on some camel manure, and this buffalo manure, well, it's the best manure for improving the soil. I even saved my guinea pig manure for the garden. The key thing when you're using animal manures is to compost them first. And that way, if there are any residual chemicals in them, it will break down before it hits the soil. And while we're talking about unconventional sources of nutrition, cane toads. They're found throughout Queensland, across northern Australia, and they're present in my garden all year round. This one I found as roadkill, and this one I euthanized humanely according to RSPCA guidelines. They're bad news for gardeners, poisoning and killing anything that consumes them, eating small reptiles, insects and other amphibians, as well as displacing and outcompeting native species for food and resources. I simply bury them under my fruit trees. By doing this, I'm making the best of a bad situation, as well as capturing and recycling large amounts of nutrients back into the soil. And I'm feeding my hungry trees for free. Mulch is essential in any garden. It suppresses weeds, it conserves moisture, and it improves the soil. I've got several types here. This is wood chip, and in that bed I've got 2 grades of chopped sugarcane. Now, buying mulch can be expensive. It can add up, so it's a good idea to look for alternatives. Arborists are continually pruning, so call your local council and find out what they do with their chipped tree clippings, because it's often a cheap or free source of mulch. Leaf mould is a garden staple that's made entirely out of decayed, composted leaves. It's used for everything from potting mix to surface mulch. It's traditionally made from fallen leaves of winter deciduous trees, but living in the subtropics, I don't have that luxury. I use leaves from my bamboo. Now, if you leave it lying around, the top is dry, but if you dig down, you get lovely leaf mould like this. I also use fallen evergreen leaves, and they make a good leaf mould, just a little bit more slowly. Both of them are low in nutrients, high in carbon, and they're really moisture retentive. So they're the perfect medium for growing ferns and palms, and you can use it as a surface mulch for rainforest plants. Another wallet killer can be buying individual bags of potting mix. If you've got the budget and the space, buying potting mix by the trailer load will save you money over time. However, you can make your own like me. I use equal parts of garden soil, horticultural sand, and old potting mix. Now, when you mix these up, you've got the perfect growing medium for a very wide range of plants. and nowhere near the cost. Idea number 3, upcycling. There's nothing cheaper than products that are free, and upcycling is a great way to repurpose materials that would otherwise have ended up in landfill. For example, styrofoam boxes. I'm using these to grow plants. The material is lightweight, it's insulating against heat and against cold. And apart from using them as growing boxes, these could possibly become a worm farm, or they could become a self-watering container. I use them in several ways. The first is to grow crops like strawberries directly into them. I find the extra height offered by the box helps keep precious fruit away from grazing creatures on the ground. At the moment, I'm growing sweet potato cuttings in recycled plastic pots and using old potting mix. Sweet potato is so dependable, it's not that fussy about what it's growing in. I'm protecting them from the sun with old net curtains rescued from op shops. I'm also growing spring onions in another couple of boxes because it keeps them nice and portable. Idea number 4, trading. There are plants, like this lime tree, that'll give you more fruit than you'll ever need, so you can share your surplus with friends and family. Citrus are classic overcroppers. Anyone who's owned a lemon tree knows what it's like to be swamped with lemons and bemused by people paying real money for them at grocers. Now, my Tahitian lime is no exception. With a little TLC, I can get 100 kilos of fruit in 6 crops during a year, and that means I can make up to 750 jars of marmalade. And it's not just lime marmalade. I make rangpur, rosella, chili jam, lemonade, lime, mandarin, citringe, and it goes on. And trading your surplus allows you to get things that you don't have the time or the inclination to produce yourself. For example, I don't keep chickens, but I'm never without eggs. I don't have an avocado tree, but I'm never without fruit when they're in season. Now, if you're thinking of growing things to trade, choose a plant that crops reliably and will always be in demand. For example, I grow bananas, bamboo shoots, and curry leaf. Idea number 5, buy once, cry once. By that I mean, pay more for quality equipment, but buy it only once. You see, cheap equipment is often not meant to be serviced or repaired at all. Examples of good equipment I've got here. This wheelbarrow's a winner because it's got a plastic tray. It doesn't rust. This watering can, well, I bought this when I emigrated and it's still going strong. This mattock was my grandfather's and it's still doing well. This spade has actually outlived its handle, but there are places like repair cafes where you can get new handles fixed to them, so it lives on. And this is my granddad's hand-propelled lawnmower. I grew up using this. I don't know what I could do without it. Now, all of these tips I've given you are to help you keep doing more of what you love with what you have.
Euphorbias are great plants in the garden. However, they've adapted very well to Australian conditions. In fact, too well, and they have become quite weedy. However, there are ways that you can use them in your garden responsibly. Firstly, a number of cultivars have been bred to be sterile, so they won't set viable seed and spread that way. There are lots of sterile euphorbias well worth hunting out in your local nursery. If you do have a fertile species of the euphorbias, like this one, this is Euphorbia wolfeni, keep your eyes out for when the flowers come, and then right late in the season you'll see these little seed pods. Now, they are the things that you've got to watch out for. They will spread like wildfire. So just make sure you cut that whole seed head right down. Be careful of the white sticky sap that comes from the cut stems. It can be really toxic, so wear gloves and eye protection, and make sure your pets don't go chewing the cut stems. By cutting off the flower heads before the seeds form, you'll find that they won't spread in your garden, they won't go jumping the fence into your neighbours or into the bushland. And then you can enjoy these wonderful plants.
Last week, we brought you a story from Melbourne's inner west, where a school has put gardening firmly on the curriculum. Well, this week, we're meeting one of the students from that school. And let's just say she's taking the homework assignment very seriously. I'm sure you'll find this as impressive as I do.
My favourite part about plants is that every day you can go in the garden, or in my case, in my little indoor garden, and I can see the progress. There's always something new to see. There's always something to do. It's just such a great hobby. There's never an end to it, really. It's just something you can continue through your life and build knowledge on, and even build expertise on. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm a 16-year-old plant lover, enthusiast and collector. I live in Melbourne's inner west in Newport with my family. I have roughly 150 different plants in my room, and of that, there's just shy of 100 different species and hybrids. I have mainly anthuriums, as that is my favourite genus, and lots of people know anthuriums as flamingo flowers maybe, but they go much beyond just the basic plants. So these grow lights were put in because I was realising that my room was a little bit dark, and for more optimum plant growth that would be beneficial. So after doing some research into it, we got full spectrum grow lights, which actually came all the way from America, which then got put on an aluminium frame and installed. I turn them on every morning when I wake up, and then they get turned off when I go to sleep at night. Sometimes when you wake up and it's 80% humidity, it can get a little bit much at times, but it's just really refreshing being able to wake up every morning, turn the lights on, and you're surrounded in like a little jungle-like atmosphere. It's really, really nice. This is a Philodendron Dean McDowell, which is a hybrid between Philodendron parsisanum and Philodendron gloriosum. I got this plant from a collector in far north Queensland, and this is actually a propagation I took from a mother plant that's grown on to be pretty big itself. The interesting thing about this plant is actually one of its features have what are called extrafloral nectaries, which produce nectar which are actually for a symbiotic relationship between the plant and ants. And the way it works is that the ants eat the nectar and they actually protect the plant from other insects which might actually eat it, and the ants benefit from the nectar and the plant benefits from basically having private guards. Now this plant is my favourite plant. It's called Anthurium walkerianum, or also it's known as the Queen Anthurium. I like it because it has such long and velvety leaves and a really cool texture. This plant also has a bit of a special story. I ordered it from far north Queensland and it came down in the post to me, and it's actually the plant that inspired me to make the vertical garden because it needs high humidity and also something to grow up. So the vertical garden is basically a structure that was built out of an old sink. It's got a piece of PVC foam board bolted to it and then covered in 2 layers of horticultural felt. Between those layers of felt, the plant roots sit, so there's no actual substrate in it, and the plant roots just grow into the felt, and they especially grow because you put the fertiliser in the water in liquid form basically, and they just get all the nutrients they need to grow from there. Every week the wall gets taken out to be hosed down, and that's basically to eliminate any of the mineral buildup that it's occurred on it. but generally speaking, it's a pretty simple upkeep. This idea actually came from a French guy named Patrick Blanc. He's got a lot of vertical gardens and he kind of innovated the concept. And after looking through his books, my dad's also an avid fan of him, kind of took inspiration from that when we were building the wall. So from when I was a toddler, I was planting trees in the park with my dad. And when I was little as well, then I kind of got into flowers because I love the colour. When I realised that succulents existed and that you can have endless colour all year round, I really got into that for a few years. And one birthday, my parents got me a Monstera deliciosa, so just a common houseplant, because I'd seen them around and other people had them and I thought they were cool. And it's all gone on from there. I have a spreadsheet of all the plants I've got. Dad suggested that I look into kind of the botanical names, and I catalogued all the succulents, I did all the research. Then when I started with indoor plants, I was like, oh, I've got to start the spreadsheet before I collect too many, so I know what I've got, what I'd like, build a wish list, and it's really helped learn the nomenclature behind it and basically see what I still want to collect. So I buy lots of the plants from growers in far north Queensland, but also from growers around the country. I also swap a lot of the plants with different people, so especially as well the members from the Aeroid Society of Australia. And the other way I get more plants is through propagation. So this is actually an Anthurium watermelonense that I propagated a few months ago, and I'm just going to repot it now. So I've got to remove all the old substrate from the roots to make sure that they adjust accordingly into the new substrate. Now I've soaked this in quite a high strength of liquid fertiliser for a few hours just to reduce the shock that the roots undergo when they're transplanted into a different media. So after the plant has been cleaned off fully, I like to repot it into my substrate of choice. Now, I use a mixture of leca and mineral blend, which contains different minerals such as zeolite. So I use this because it helps reduce the mould and also ensures that there's no fungus gnats that can get into the substrate. And before I repot plants, I always sterilise this to again reduce any mould, pathogens, rot, anything that would still be remaining in the mix. So this plant is now ready to go on my Anthurium table in my room. Outside of my bedroom, I've started kind of taking over a few areas in the house. So there's a ledge in the kitchen that I've managed to sneak a few plants onto. Basically, wherever there's a little bit of space and they're not in the way, I try and just sneak a couple in. Being surrounded by greenery is just such a healthy and really, really nice thing to have.
I don't know about you, but I'm ready to get out there. Here's your jobs for the weekend, to get those wheels spinning. In cool areas, trees can be assessed now for a post-frost prune. Trim branches that have died in the frost to allow the new growth to come through. It's time for tomatoes. Get them into fertile ground along with 2 tablespoons of potash before watering in. Feed sprouting peonies with high phosphorus slow release pellets. Apply it in a ring around the plant away from crown and stems. In warm areas, spring blooming anemones are out in abundance and will love a liquid fertiliser lunch. Snip off finished foliage at the base as needed. Cut back overgrown vines to keep things under control. Be sure to wear eye protection to avoid falling twigs and sap. Did you know purple coneflowers, Echinacea purpurea, can be propagated by root cuttings? Divide with a spade, then replant in sandy compost. In subtropical areas, bedding plants like calendula can be treated as short-lived annuals at your place. Add liquid fertiliser throughout the season and deadhead regularly. Looking for a shade-loving cactus? Ripsalis bactifera has edible sweet fruits that are ready to harvest now. Try your hand at making a kokedama ball. Check out our website on how to make your very own living ornament. In tropical areas, tuck in a tassel fern. Line a coir hanging basket with expanded clay balls, then pot up your fern with an aerated mix of perlite and orchid bark. It's cashew season. Mulch trees and keep them well watered, about 1 metre away from the root zone. Fallen fruits should be left to dry before roasting. Allow guavas to ripen on the tree to develop their full flavour. They'll want a heavy prune after this harvest to stimulate the next batch. In arid areas, it's the optimum time to plant eggplant, tomatoes and capsicum. Water in with seaweed solution to protect from transplant shock. Plant romaine or cos lettuce 20 centimetres apart in a bright shady spot with good airflow. Harvest the outer leaves first for a continuous supply. Divide aloe vera and repot into a coarse, free-draining mix. These succulents love the sun, and if you do too, they'll soothe your scorched skin. That should get you grooving in the garden this weekend. Make sure to follow us on social media and use hashtag ABCMyGarden to show us how you're growing. Time's up. That's just about all we can fit in for this week. But we'll be back next time with even more.
If you're running out of room to grow more plants at your place, I'm going to show you how you can increase your growing space by taking it vertical.
I'm visiting what was once a weedy patch of gravel alongside a very busy Melbourne train line. And now it's been transformed into a picturesque garden, if you'll excuse the noise of the trains.
And hold on to your seahorses. I'm leaping into a miniature underwater world and meeting an aquascaper. It's all about gardening, architecture and pond life, all in a tank.